That's me. This is how I got into photography. I was a little skateboard brat. I spent all my paper route money at the 1 hour photo place taking blurry pictures of skateboarding. And then my mom forced me to, when I was 13, to go to the community center and take a basic photography class. And in that class, I just fell in love instantly. I don't know, maybe it's the smell of Fixer or something. And it was perfect timing too. I was just starting to smoke, and the teacher's like, well, you know, it's a pack of smokes or a roll of film. And I was like, oh, and I quit. But anyway, so I got into photography through skateboarding. And in the 80s, all the 70s skate parks had closed. So we just had to build our own stuff. And it's kind of shocking that our friends' parents let us build things like this in their backyard. Yeah. And we were like between 14 and 17 years old. And just self-taught how to cut stuff. It's not the best circle. We're trying to make a pool. But in any case, the reason I show this is I've always been part of this kind of punk skateboarding do-it-yourself thing. And when I got into photography, and when I actually got into junior college where I used a view camera for the first time, I totally fell in love with the simplicity of the camera, sold my fisheye lens and all that stuff, and made my own view camera. I fell in love with the contact print, the simplicity of just shooting a piece of film and then that piece of film's touching each print that's made. The film that was made, it's just, I don't know, it's just, there's something very simple about it. So this is before the internet. So at the library, I got a book that had one page on how to fold bellows, and it was all sides were the same. But through that, it took me a while to figure. I folded my own bellows. I made the camera all myself. It cost about $150. It took about 3 months to make, and I had actually bought an old view camera that was from 1907, and it just felt like I was carrying an antique around, and it scared the hell out of me. It was like 3.5 months worth of rent at the time, so that's all I could think about. So I sold that, paid my rent for a couple months, and then that thing cost $150, and I could fix whatever. When anything broke, I didn't care. I could fix it.
That's your Bob Dylan photo.
I'll take it. So I was doing I actually have skateboarding photography out at this place called the Nude Bowl in Palm Springs. I was still shooting alternative lifestyle kind of stuff with this view camera, which is kind of insane, because I could do 4 shots in a day, and then I'd have to set up my changing tent. So it really forced me to slow down, and that's kind of part of how I got here too. I started doing these night photographs, and when I'd go camping, and I don't wear a watch, and so if I could just wake up before sunrise automatically to close the lens, I got the shot. If not, oh well. And usually, if not, that just meant it was going to be this black square. But then in 2003, I got this. And this is my very first piece of film that accidentally got burned. Somebody was asking me if it's a true story. It is a true story. We polished off a handle of Jim Beam around a campfire, and I woke up around 9 in the morning. I looked out at my camera. I'm like, well, that shot's just lost. It's overexposed. And we went about our day, and I took my other photos, and at the end of the day, when I set up my tent, I was pulling the film out of the film holder, and there was a tear in it, and I couldn't figure out how I could have torn it. But then you could kind of smell a burnt smell, and I was like, oh my God. But at the time, I just thought it was a ruined exposure. I didn't think about what it meant. And when I got home, I was developing these sheets of film, and when I got to that piece, I'm like, is it even worth processing? And thankfully, I did process it, and when I flicked the lights on, I ended up with a black and white transparency instead of a negative. The film had done this magical thing called solarization, which is often mistaken with man rays turning the lights on and off in the darkroom while the print's in a developer tray. This is true solarization, where it's a reversal of tonality through extreme overexposure. The silver halides just freak out, and they just tick back the other direction. And I had learned this because I had taken a daguerreotype class with Jerry Spagnoli in 1994. And when you do a daguerreotype outside, the plates are very blue sensitive. So the sky would always get really overexposed and actually not be the brightest thing. It would solarize and be kind of a dark gray sometimes, or blue if you're using mercury. And so I learned about solarization through those old processes. So this happened, and I thought it was very cool, but I still didn't really know what to do. And being a photographer with a piece of film, and I've been contact printing, I made a contact print of it. And for about 3 years, I was burning film and making these contact prints that were a generation removed. The positive film went back into negative when I made a contact print. It's very confusing. I knew there was something there. And for 3 years, I was really struggling to figure out how to explain this thing. And I probably should have just gone back. And I was thinking about making light boxes for a minute and just burning film. But luckily, I'm going to fast forward a lot. I used to work at this black and white photo lab in the mid-'90s in the dog patch in San Francisco. The graveyard shift, I had to run like 5 enlargers at a time. It'd be like band photos, wedding pictures, CEO portraits, and like pictures of socks on a white background for Mervyn's newspaper ads. It was crazy. It was crazy. When I left that job, though, they were getting rid of all this old paper that they had collected forever. So I just happened, in 95 or 96, I collected a ton of paper from the 70s till the late 80s. And I just was going to make photograms or something. I was broke. I'm like, this is free paper. It's not good to make enlargements on it, but there will be something I can do with it. And about 10 years later, I kept looking at the pieces of film, and finally I looked at that stack of paper and burned a few sheets of paper, and most of them were black rectangles with a burned line in it. They wouldn't solarize, but luckily I had 1 or 2 boxes that gave me a positive image. And through years of just collecting paper, luckily, I don't know if you are familiar with the work of Alison Rossiter. We're friends, and I think we're friends because she wants 1950 and earlier, and I want 1950 and later. So we help each other find old paper. But through learning about all the different kinds of paper, there's a very small amount that will do something like this. And this is years of just working in the darkroom, working with different developer formulas and restrainers in the developer to kind of bump the contrast of this old paper and to get something like that. And, you know, of course, I've always been, this is William Henry Jackson. I've always been just amazed at like the work of him and Carlton Watkins, and just think about glass plates. Developing in the field, I will always have crazy respect for how insane that is. And to have pack animals, and so when I built my 7x7, that camera was a 7-inch by 17-inch negative. Everyone thought that was crazy. I'm like, no, this is nothing. It weighs like 10 pounds. I don't have that. In the beginning of the Sunburn project, I got a hold of some 20 by 24 paper that solarized. And then later I got a roll of mural paper that solarized. I was like, I'm going to have to build some bigger cameras. So I lived for 20 years south of Market in San Francisco by Civic Center in a small little apartment. Luckily, my roommate was a bike messenger, so he didn't care that I used the living room as the wood shop. I would build things like this. So that's my first 30 by 40 camera. I've just rebuilt it after all these years. Making use of the wheel. They don't make tripods big enough that I could carry to hold that. So I developed this. It's a modified garden wagon that acts like a the focus bed of a camera, but also the tripod head of a tripod. And then next to it, to the left, is I started getting into, also through daguerreotype class with Jerry Spagnoli, I learned about faster optics and aerial reconnaissance cameras. During World War II, Korean War, they were meant to photograph in very low light situations on big sheets of film. And that lens, that's the biggest lens I got, and I got it on eBay, and you had to pick it up. They couldn't ship it, and it was in Salt Lake City, and I happened to have a friend in Salt Lake. I'm like, hey man, I just bought this lens. Can you please pick it up? And I just got a text that said, you went too far. It's about 130 pounds, and that came off of a U-2 spy plane. That probably cost the government $500,000. I have no idea. It's a bunch of glass, and I thought it was some kind of lens that would come out of that housing, but it lives there. So I had to get a wheelchair. It uses a car jack to raise and lower the lens. I had to get a wheelchair ramp for my van.
How much was it on eBay?
$900.
Awesome.
So in any case, I started getting into collecting optics, and the reason why I wanted these faster lenses is they would let exponentially more light onto the paper, causing that solarization to happen. So certain papers that wouldn't work with a normal lens would work with these crazy lenses. Another effect, though, is that it would, this is a short little video. It's things I never thought I'd ever have to deal with photographing. That's a solar panel that's running a little computer fan that's going through this baffled thing through a hole in bellows to vent the smoke out of the camera. Because as the exposure goes on, the bellows just fill with smoke, and then it's like you're photographing through fog. Wow. So I have to vent the camera. It's this really elemental thing that's happening that, I even have to worry about flat tires on my camera, because sometimes the wagon tires spring a leak. But what happens is you get with these lenses, you get these really heavy burns. And in the camera, the image is projected onto the paper upside down and backwards. So you got to imagine this flipped 180. And what looks like dripping is actually all the heat and smoke rising, slowly cooking the gelatin off of the paper. And it's just, I don't know, this was all happening right as Kodak had said they were going to stop making paper. Agfa was going to stop making paper. People bought Epson printers and put them in their darkroom sinks. It was like this huge transition. People were just giving me paper. And it was just this analog thing that you just can't do digitally. And it really, I've always loved being in the darkroom. I've always loved slow photography. And I don't know, the timing of how this all happened just really worked wonderfully. I also started working with sequences. This is actually in the back room. This is sunrise over San Francisco Bay, and the sun. These are negatives, so everything's backwards. The sun actually is. If you were out on the landscape, the sun would be going from lower left to top right, but since it's a negative, it's backwards. So when I make these sequences, I keep them backwards because that's a sunrise as well. I'm doing these sequences. These are 12-inch by 20-inch negatives. And thinking about like how Muybridge photographed motion, kind of a play on that. Then I started making weirder cameras. And my friends all named my cameras that U-2 spy plane that's called the Sad Robot. As soon as I showed my friend this picture of this camera, it's using wetsuit material as a bellows, so it's just stretchy enough so I can focus. But they ran out of black, so all I had was blue and black, and the black had to be on the inside. So I sent him this picture, and he just called it Sweatpants Boner. And so now everyone just calls them sweatpants. So this is a sweatpants piece right here. But this is the camera in action. It's a panoramic format on its side. It deals with that's partially dealing with optical distortions and trying to capture a full day and to keep that arc and from being really angular. I had to build a gigantic Lazy Susan for the wagon to sit in. And this is actually photographing this piece right here. And this is in the Mojave, just east of Ridgecrest. And again, you're getting that heavy burning on a couple of the frames. On this piece too, I should say, it's made on an RC paper, so it melts instead of burning like a double weight fiber-based paper. So there's a distortion in the paper that's from the heat just freaking out the paper base. But I just love, it's weird to make work. I'm still astounded that I'm just photographing the rotation of the Earth. I mean, the sun's not moving. We're the ones that are moving, and this, because I don't have control of my subject, I have to go, like, if I want an arc like this, I have to wait for the winter. In the summer, it curves the opposite direction and goes straight up over your head and curves the other way. This is from Point Reyes in San Francisco area in the winter. This is in the Arctic Circle in Alaska in July, or in June, near the solstice. That's the midnight sun, that low point. And I even ended up, this is a little sequence. Anybody have any ideas where the sun moves like that? Yep, the equator. So that's the Galapagos Islands. I was looking on the globe, and I was like, Somalia? And it was right around when the pirates thing was happening. I'm like, okay, not Somalia. Mouth of the Amazon, that seems kind of crazy too. Indonesia, but it's really cloudy all the time. So I ended up at the Galapagos, and it's crazy to go there just to make this piece. And when it's exposing, I actually have a hole in the bellows, and I can look inside and see the exposure. And when I saw it making the line, I got excited, even though I knew it was going to do that. It's like, wow, it really is. It's going straight up and down. And when you're dealing with the sun, eclipses happen. This is this year in April. Planned to be on the Mexican border, in Texas border, and ended up in the middle of Arkansas because of the weather. This is me making this little 4x5 piece that's on the wall above the signage over there. That is another big heavy lens that's from the Korean War era, not a U-2 spy plane lens, but it's about 40 pounds of glass. And you take the lens cap off and it'll just instantly make this little plume of smoke. It's really cool. So this is me working as fast as I can, trying to, because the sun is a very telephoto lens, so if you put the sun you can't put the sun in the middle, you have to put it kind of off to the side, and by the time you put the lens cap on, film holder, in the dark side, it will be in the center. But you have to kind of be ahead of it a little bit. Yeah, this is the piece. This is when it's coming out of eclipse. And then there was an annular eclipse last year, this is in eastern Nevada, and this is all guns a-blazing kind of deal. My girlfriend helped me with a couple of the lens cap situations because there's only so much time. The big camera kind of in the middle there, that's a homemade 16 by 20 camera, and that actually ended up making this piece. And so what's happening is I'm just removing the lens cap at a certain amount of time. I was there the day before to time out the exposure because I knew where where it's not totality, but where the eclipse happens, the center of the eclipse, and then I need a day to get the composition set and to really nail down exactly where the position of the sun. But this is just removing the lens caps on and off. What's interesting is it was partly cloudy, but with each exposure, the clouds that are in the sky at that point, they imprint with each exposure. So it's just this addition of clouds while making this piece. Okay, so now, so those are kind of the more straightforward linear works. And something happened, another accident, with a long conversation with the park ranger while I was trying to do a winter piece in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The exposure starts on the right, the sunrise, and then the top burnt line on the left here, that's middle of the day, that's around noon. And these little, in between each frame, it's about, depending on the lens I have, it's about 5 minutes to put the lens cap back on, see the sun's going off the frame, put the lens cap back on before it melts the film holder, and then remove the film holder, take the lens cap off, mark where the sun is in the landscape, transfer those measurements to the other side of the camera, and spin the camera around to get the next frame, level the camera, and put a new film holder in. Well, this park ranger rolled up on me right as I was in the middle of changing from the middle of the day to the afternoon, asking if I had a permit, and I was like, I'm an artist, this camera takes up the same space as somebody doing a watercolor easel, I don't need a permit. And in that conversation, I was just talking to him and doing it, and then I put the same I didn't flip the holder over in my hand, I just exposed the frame. And when I looked in the camera, I was like, I blew it. But when I got home, I saw this, and I was like, this is kind of interesting. And the word heliograph means to, write with light. We think heliographs, photography nerds tend to think about it as Niepce's, like the oldest known photograph is called a heliograph. It's made with this asphalt. It's a crazy process. Matthew Brandt made some of them. But I'm using the term in meaning writing with the sun, a heliograph. And so I took this idea, and this is actually the same situation. It's a morning, midday, and late afternoon, but all in the same frame. And this is San Francisco Bay. And it's just using the sun and the rotation of the earth as my writing instrument for creating different compositions. There are, I also, when they're abstraction pieces like this is about 4 hours of me with the camera pointed straight up, just taking the lens cap off and rotating the camera for about, 3 or 4 hours. Just pure abstraction. And then I started putting, sunrises and sunsets on top of each other. And you can see, this is looking inside the camera during exposure. You can see there's a dark horizon line, but just above it, there's a kind of a white mountain line. And what that is that's the imprint from the sunrise exposure. It does this little bit of a negative printout. When you develop it, it'll turn into a positive. But I can use that to mark where the horizon was. I can be in the dark in my van with safe light, red safe light, and I can measure. And I also make marks on the ground glass. And then looking east on top of looking west. That kind of, and this happens to be by around the equinox, where the sun's apparent trajectory is kind of like this 45-degree angle, and making use of that compositionally. You'll also see what happens to paper as it burns. So when I make these pieces, I have to wait for it to get totally dark, for the sun to go down and get totally dark, so I can just open the back of the camera and press that little bit down and put the dark slide in, and. Because if I try to put a dark slide in, it would just tear that piece of paper and destroy the piece. But this is what my ground glass looked like for a while on all my cameras. I started putting summer on top of winter, the desert on top of the Arctic Circle or the Pacific Northwest. And each holder had different color codes. There's some notations as to what kind of lenses, mountain range things. It got a little crazy. But like this is an example of, this piece is just on the wall over here. This is a winter afternoon piece over the strait, looking south from San Juan Island over the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And then the more vertical line is near the summer solstice in the Mojave, probably outside of Barstow or something like that. But like, so there's about 6 months apart from each other. So that piece of paper just sits in that film holder and I have to just wait. And then things get more complicated. This is 2 sunrises over San Francisco Bay and 2 sunsets over the Pacific Ocean. I live in Pacifica, just south of San Francisco, so I photographed the sun rising up over the bay, go have lunch, and then sit at the coast and photograph the sunset. But to get the camera and the film holder in and to have the water line in the exact same spot for all these exposures and to have that line up technically is kind of crazy to pull off, and there's many failures to get this piece. This is two full days on San Juan Island, looking over the Strait of Juan de Fuca. I think one of the days is New Year's Eve and one is New Year's Day. And just changing the starting point of sunrise. And they're just these, I find them to be beautiful abstractions. And then, you're out there for hours, all day, and you have a lot of time to think and think about other possibilities with this process and with cameras and what is a camera. And I was thinking about Muybridge's motion studies. And so I started off with just 4 lenses. This piece is right up here. That's the very first one. It's number 1. 35 millimeter lenses that came on every Pentax K1000. That's at every high school or junior college where you could borrow a film camera. It's that basic 50 millimeter lens. And I needed the same lens so that the circles would all be the same size. And just doing a kind of a solar locomotion. But then I started collecting. I realized I needed 63 lenses, and I could cover a 20 by 24 sheet of paper. And so I made this. This is called the Fly. And the initial idea was to make a whole long motion study of the sun, and I made that piece, and I wasn't very thrilled about it. But then I was thinking about it. I also like the idea of the eye having to negotiate all these image circles at once. And they all the lenses have apertures. You can focus them differently too. So this is in Alaska, and it's a single exposure. The very center of the lens is wide open at f2, and then as you slowly go to the corners, the lens gets smaller and stops down to f22. And what's interesting is you can see this threshold of solarization happen. When you get on the corners, that mountain range is in negative. And the sun is white, and as you slowly get towards the center, you get more and more landscape. The clouds start turning white. The landscape reverses, the sky gets white, and you get this whole threshold of solarization happening. And I just thought it would be interesting for your brain to kind of process all these circles. Also, you can, this is me taking the lens cap, just rows of lens caps on and off, and slowly moving the camera from sunrise to sunset, and timing it, doing the math to time it so that the sun would be in the frame of each row. I was also making these around the same time as I was starting the heliograph work. So this is kind of a poly-optic heliograph, a sunrise around the equinox, where it's make that kind of straight line, sunrise over San Francisco Bay and sunset in Nevada. Okay, and then again, you have plenty of time to think about materials. This is something I found on the internet. There's this stuff called ballistic gelatin, and that's a bullet going through ballistic gelatin to see the velocity of how far a bullet can go through something. And I'm showing you this because I wanted to take this idea onto instant pack film, like Polaroid, especially the kind of film where you would peel it apart and throw away the negative and keep the print. The way that pack is made, sorry, this is complicated. Sorry, this is just easier. The part you throw away is actually the negative. That's what gets exposed to the light. The print is on the other side of this barrier, and then it's an amazing system. Edwin Land figured it out. It's so complicated and beautiful. But there's 10 shots in a pack, and so all the negatives are stacked on top of each other. So I was thinking about using one of my heavier lenses, making a single exposure and seeing how far, like making the sun, the light be the bullet, so to speak, to see how far it could penetrate through the pack. It makes a lot of smoke. This is not a great video, but just to give you an idea.
You need your fan going.
Yeah. Well, this one, there's no landscape, so I was like, ah.
Yeah.
And then you can see I'm just exposing frame 1. And this is all 10 sheets. So frame 1 is on the left, and that's why it's white. It's the only one that actually saw light. Frames 2 to about 4 or 5, got burned all the way through, and then the rest is just this heat signature that created this exposure. They aren't very fun to process because the negatives all glue themselves together, so I have to go in the dark room and they melt together, so you got to peel each one apart in total darkness and then run them through these rollers. But there's a hole where the negative is, so chemistry squirts out. So you got to clean the rollers each time, each sheet. Well, the negative, there is just varying degrees of a burnt hole until it's just kind of like this warped thing on frame 10. So I throw them away. I just keep the prints. But when you develop it, the chemistry, what the chemistry does is it moves the dyes from the negative onto the print. It's a dye diffusion is transferring onto the print. So those, when you see a Polaroid, you're like, oh, it was in the camera. It wasn't in the camera, but it didn't see any light. The chemistry from the developer pack and the negative is what really did it, and it's just a transference.
So the negative's not usable anymore?
No, it's their one. That's why you throw them away.
Yeah.
So this is what I had made this piece. I'm also messing with turning, like that red is me doing that sheet under safe light conditions and picking up the red color. But you can see what happens to the pack. It burns all the way through the plastic.
Yeah,
and those are some of the negatives from that piece. And those little black bits, that's little bits of the negative that transfer onto the print. And sometimes they're the full pack, sometimes there are only 4 pieces, sometimes there are only 2. It just depends on what I think works best. You read this from the top left across and then go down, and I only go to frame 8. 9 and 10 were just totally black.
They almost look like galaxies. You know,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting you should say that. Also just dealing with the framing the sun and thinking about creating these multiple patterns and grids where that follow through line through these different color. And certain lenses won't burn. This is a wide angle lens, that's why the sun's so skinny, but it created this blue that was really beautiful. This is where, kind of like that one that looked like a shotgun piece of just a bunch of suns. That's what's happening on frame 1, but in the center, I let that sit for about 30 seconds and really kind of burn through the pack. And then the rest were all about 5 to 10 second exposures and getting that exposure to transfer through the pack. This is kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch version of that, where I slowly just am moving the tripod slowly with this geared head, and it's just slowly turning and pausing and turning and pausing for a long time. But what's interesting, and your comment is perfect, when you get to about frame 4, when the James Webb Telescope came out and they came out with the first picture,
Yeah, of all those galaxies, huh? Yeah.
the color palette is pretty close,
Yes.
and there's notes to it. And I was just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I know, I thought that was just a wonderful coincidence. Okay, so lastly, brand new work called Inverse, and it's while I was making the Sunburn work, occasionally, like I'd get a piece like this. This was during there was some fire in LA mountains was totally covering the Mojave. It was smoky, dim, and I was just trying to do a single exposure. And it was just so dark that the sun solarized, the sky solarized, and around the horizon, just below the sun, it's kind of a positive image. But the rest of the image stayed in negative. It didn't solarize. And occasionally I get pieces that rode that line between the two. And then I got to thinking about how analog photography is just inherently, it's been this negative and positive relationship. And I started thinking, well, what can I do? What can I do with this? So I made these custom dark slides, partially obscuring half of the frame. Sometimes it's a circle. I'm still working on, this is actually the second circle piece I have ever made that's in the show here, but that's the dark slide. And it's a 16 by 20 on the right and an 11 by 14 film holder on the left. And you can see some like remnants of past sunburns or poly-optic. If you can see all those little dashes, that's from a 16 by 20 poly-optic. But in any case, what's happening is I am making work like this. It's a positive and negative, all in camera, all on the same piece of paper, on the same location. It's just time. It's just exposure. I do a short little exposure to get a negative image across the whole paper negative. And then I cover the right half and blast the left half for about 45 minutes on a very particular kind of paper. There's a little airspace for the dark slide, so it's about 1/8 of an inch. So light will bleed across onto the negative, and that just says photography to me. This is in Yosemite, but like if you look at the sky, see how the bleed over is there's that black kind of fuzziness that's bleeding over more than in the shadowy part of the mountain, and that says photography to me. That's just like a light leak that's kind of being exaggerated. Same down on the bottom half where the snow is reflecting a lot, and its effect is bleeding into the negative image. And I don't know. For me, this is visually it's very strange, and I'm fascinated by it, and I'm just going with it. This is a piece in the show. This is an abandoned mining cabin in northern Nevada. This is the circle piece.
Same area?
This is these rocks just east of Ridgecrest again. Yeah, it's really should be a national park. I think it was sacrificed for the desert to save the desert tortoise. I think the desert tortoise got like 1 million acres, and then they sacrificed this beautiful area that I'm up there with my cameras, and I'm being surrounded by a bunch of guys on motorcycles, off-roading, or shooting guns or whatever. The Mojave. Yeah, this is that same location. These beautiful, gigantic boulders. And motorcycles drive right all around them. And sometimes right in front of the camera, too. Yeah, I don't know who camps with the Trump flag. Like, really? Any case, so this is, let's see, four 11 by 14 negatives. And what I'm doing is, it's a panorama. It takes most of the day to do this, but flipping what side of the paper negative I'm covering so that there's moments where the two negatives of each piece of paper meet and then the two positives of each sheet meet. And it's kind of like an X-ray vision. It's almost like looking at two different spectrums of light in some ways. It's visually very strange. This is just south down the road from there. These were all made this year. This is Trona Pinnacles and just a long panorama most of the day. The shadows on the right are morning shadows that are going this, and then they slowly, I'm heading towards the afternoon on the left. Yeah, but it's something I'm doing. And at this point, I'm sitting on all this paper that solarizes, and this is kind of an extrapolation of everything I've learned over the past 20 years with solarization, and I can't go back to straight photography. I don't know. I just this is way more exciting to me.
No CEO portraits, right?
What's that?
No CEO portraits.
No. Thank God. Yeah. So in any case, that's my last slide. But if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free. I'm going to turn the lights up. This is it.